morning that it happened, I seen the videos that were just heartbreaking. I'm a mother. I have sisters. I have been in situations where this could have been me, in my younger years where, females were after me about guys and guys were playing both sides, things like that. So, I cried about it from the first day that I seen it, you know, and especially, seeing her mother, her sisters, and what was the icing on the cake for me was when I seen her son at the funeral, and he kind of like, like he just couldn't take it. And I'm just like, no, I have children, and my children love me, and it just brings chills to me. So I have been following this story since it first happened, the first day, the first morning. But also, I've seen like different content creators' pages, but I was familiar with your page. That's what made me contact you because it was just like, like I was so happy and excited the day when she was incarcerated. Like for real, on December the 3rd, I was just like, yes, this was something like it crushed my heart to know that that happened to that girl and her family and her son. So, I was fully aware of who she is, who her family is, like, the post. I've been following this story since day one. So when, I knew I had to go for like a traffic like violation, missing court, I knew that I would end up where she was at. So I don't know. I just felt it. But I knew I was like maternity ward, medical, same thing. So that night when I got there, everyone was sleeping. So that morning when they were calling everyone for vitals or prenatal vitamins, they did say Johnson. And they was like, Johnson is refusing. So I was like, there has to be her. I just felt it. I just knew God, like I was like, I'm gonna really watch her. So the unit that we were on, it was like maybe at the most 14 to 15 women. Most of them were pregnant. But in this first particular room, there was 5 women to the room. 3 Caucasian women, 1 Mexican, and it was Miss Johnson. She finally did come out after a while to get on the phone. It seems to me that, that was pretty much all that she was worried about doing. She wasn't really eating. She was expressing that she was vegan to the officers. So they didn't really have much of a variety to give to her. So pretty much she just, she was on the phone. She was just like smiling, giggling on the phone. Most of the time, like a lot of people couldn't even use the phone because it just seemed like, she needed to be on that phone communicating with quote unquote her baby daddy. I never like I couldn't me as a person, couldn't bring it to myself to even really like talk to her or even give her a smile because I wasn't going to do that. I had to really contain myself. This little small day room, we would be out from 7 to 1. And then we would come back out from like 4 to 9:30 at night. The only thing, she would sometimes sit at the table with the girls. Well, mostly she's on the phone. But she would sometimes sit at the table with the young ladies. And, I did hear her, and I wouldn't sit at the table. I was sitting like 2 tables over. But you can hear everything. It's a really small room. You can hear everything everyone was saying. But when she would be on the phone, I really couldn't hear because she would have the phone, or her hand over her mouth while she would be on the phone. So I did hear her on one particular day saying that, and of course I didn't know what was going on with Carlos with the DCFS. situation. I guess that was what was going on that day. So she was like, I don't know, her family don't want him to be around the baby, well, around his son. And they think they're saying it's traumatic. Everyone's saying it's traumatic, but how is it traumatic or traumatizing? I was looking at the corner of my eye like, no, she couldn't be serious. So she was like, he was supposed to been here custody of his son because even when the little boy was a baby, she left the baby outside, and then she recently just left the baby outside and the little boy rung the doorbell. Yeah, we all seen that on Facebook, but this is what she was saying to these women. 1 second, okay?
Welcome to Crime Scene Chronicles, where we just don't follow the crime. We explore the mind behind it. Subscribe and stay with us, because some truths are hidden deeper than you think.
At 9:06 in the morning, on September 8th, 2025, Romeca Meeks Blackman did what she did every school day. She pulled up outside a school in Chicago's South Loop, walked her 6-year-old son to the door, kissed him goodbye, and told him to have a great day. Moments later, on the same stretch of sidewalk on West Cermak Road, she was shot in the face. She was rushed to Stroger Hospital. She was pronounced dead soon after. She was 31 years old, a nursing student building a future for herself and her son, and by every account from the people who loved her, she was joyful, energetic, and full of life right up until the second that life was taken from her. Tonight we're going to walk through exactly what's known about how Romeca Meeks Blackman died, what's actually been charged in court, and why a case with a shooter who never denied pulling the trigger has still taken over a year to move toward trial. We're not going to speculate about things that haven't been proven. We're not going to repeat rumors as if they're established fact. What we are going to do is lay out carefully and honestly everything the public record actually shows, because Romeca deserves a telling of her story that's built on truth, not noise. If this is your first time with us, welcome to Crime Scene Chronicle Crime, where we follow real cases the way they actually deserve to be followed, patiently, accurately, and with real respect for the people whose lives are at the center of them. If that's what you're here for, hit like, subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicle Crime, and turn on notifications, because this is a case that is still unfolding, and there's more to come. Let's start with who Romeca Meeks Blackman actually was, because in cases like this, it's far too easy for the victim to become a footnote in someone else's story. She was a mother. She was a nursing student, working toward a career that would let her build a stable, independent life for herself and her son. Friends and family described her as someone who loved to dance, who filled her social media with the kind of playful, everyday joy that comes from someone genuinely enjoying her own life. TikTok videos, moments with her son, the ordinary texture of a young mother trying to give her child a good childhood while working towards something bigger for both of them. On the morning she died, she was doing the most ordinary thing in the world, dropping her son off at school, the ordinary handoff every parent makes on countless mornings without a second thought about whether it might be the last one. Here's what the public record establishes happened next. According to police and prosecutors, in the moments after Romeca dropped her son off, she became involved in a physical altercation with a woman named Quadaja Johnson, who goes by Holly. The two women, according to reporting on the case, shared a complicated connection. Both of them had children with the same man, identified in court reporting as Carlos Smith. Investigators say that after the altercation, Johnson walked back to her own vehicle, retrieved a handgun, and returned to fire multiple shots, one of which struck Romeca in the face. Prosecutors have stated that Johnson then fist-bumped the children's father before Romeca was rushed to the hospital, where she later died. That's what prosecutors allege happened, based on witness accounts and video that circulated in the aftermath. It's important that we say clearly that some of what happened before and during that altercation is still legally disputed, and we'll get to exactly how in a moment. But the sequence of the shooting itself, the altercation, the walk back to the car, the shots fired, the fist bump, the rush to the hospital, is what has been laid out in court filings and reported by multiple news outlets covering the case. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, something happened that confused and angered a lot of people who were following the story. And it's worth understanding exactly what that was, because it shaped the entire next year of this case. Khadijah Johnson was taken into custody at the scene, and then, without being charged, she was released. For months, that single fact, a woman who admitted firing the gun, walking free while the victim's family buried her, became the center of enormous public frustration. Romeca's family publicly questioned why charges hadn't come immediately. Community members organized, made noise online, and demanded answers. And it's genuinely worth understanding why that gap existed, because it wasn't necessarily neglect. In officer-involved shootings and self-defense claims, prosecutors often take time to review evidence, secure witness statements, and build a case that can actually hold up in court, rather than filing charges immediately and risking a weak prosecution. That process, whatever its intention, meant Khadijah Johnson lived her daily life uncharged for nearly 3 months while Romeca's family grieved and waited. Then, on December 4, 2025, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office announced that Khadijah Johnson had been formally charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors stated plainly that the evidence did not support her claim of self-defense. She was taken back into custody. A judge initially ordered her held without bail. That claim of self-defense is central to understanding the legal shape of this case, so let's walk through it honestly, because it's not simply prosecutors' word against a shooter with no explanation at all. According to Johnson's defense attorneys, she had previously filed an order of protection against Romeca, alleging that Romeca had threatened her, through phone calls, text messages, and even through Romeca's own family members. The defense has claimed that Romeca threatened Johnson's grandmother directly, saying she intended to kill Johnson. The defense has also emphasized that Johnson was pregnant at the time of the shooting, a detail her legal team has used to argue that she felt an especially acute fear for her safety and the safety of the child she was carrying. Prosecutors, for their part, have pushed back hard on that self-defense framing and pointed to specific facts that complicated substantially. According to court filings, Johnson had never actually met Romeca in person before that morning, despite having filed that order of protection against her. Prosecutors have also emphasized the sequence recorded by witnesses and partially captured on video, that after an initial physical altercation, Johnson walked away, went back to her own car, retrieved a firearm, and then returned to the confrontation before firing. Legally, that sequence matters enormously, because self-defense claims typically hinge on an immediate, ongoing threat. And prosecutors argue that walking back to a vehicle, opening it, retrieving a weapon, and returning is a meaningfully different scenario than firing in the middle of an uninterrupted physical struggle. In January 2026, prosecutors added 5 additional charges against Johnson, building out the case beyond the original first-degree murder count. Court documents cited by local reporters allege that, after retrieving the handgun from her car, Johnson fired multiple shots at Romeca, and that she fist-bumped Carlos Smith, the father of both women's children, in the immediate aftermath, before Romeca was rushed to the hospital. That detail, if it holds up as prosecutors have described it, is obviously a difficult one for any self-defense narrative to sit alongside, and it's likely part of why the state's attorney's office felt confident enough to expand the charges rather than narrow them. Then earlier this year, the case took another turn that reanimated public attention and frustration. After initially being denied pretrial release, Khadijah Johnson was granted release by a Cook County judge while she awaits trial. The conditions are significant: 24-hour electronic monitoring, surrender of her passport, surrender of her firearm owner's identification card, and a prohibition on leaving the state of Illinois. Those are not light restrictions, and they reflect a judge's judgment that release could be managed responsibly under close supervision. But for Romeca's family and the community that has followed this case since the beginning, the news that the woman charged with killing her was walking free again, on monitoring, but free, reopened a wound that had barely begun to close. It's worth pausing here to talk honestly about how difficult and how legally complicated pretrial release decisions actually are, because this case has become a flashpoint for a much larger conversation happening across the country about bail reform and pretrial detention. A charge is not a conviction. Under the law, Khadijah Johnson is presumed innocent unless and until a jury finds otherwise, and pretrial release decisions are supposed to weigh flight risk and danger to the community against that presumption of innocence, not punish someone in advance of a verdict. Whether the specific conditions imposed here, monitoring, surrendered documents, a stay-in-state order, actually satisfy that balance is a legitimate subject of public debate. What isn't legitimate is treating the release itself as proof that the justice system has failed, when in reality, it reflects how the law is designed to function before a case has been fully tried. That tension between a grieving family's need for accountability and a legal system built around the presumption of innocence is really the emotional center of this entire case, and it's worth sitting with rather than rushing past. There's another figure who's become impossible to separate from this story, and it's worth addressing him directly and carefully. Carlos Smith, the father of both women's children. Public commentary and community frustration around this case has, at times, focused heavily on Smith's role in the events leading up to the shooting. Questions about what he knew, what he may have said to either woman in the days and weeks before, and what his presence at the scene that morning actually meant. It's important to be precise here. Carlos Smith has not been charged with any crime in connection with Romeca's death. A petition has circulated publicly calling for a fuller investigation into his alleged role and presence during the events leading up to the shooting. And that petition itself, to its credit, is explicit that it is not declaring him guilty of anything, only asking for transparency about what was reviewed. Smith himself has spoken publicly, if briefly, saying that some of what witnesses have described doesn't match what he says actually happened. Beyond that, what role, if any, he played remains a matter of public question rather than legal finding. And that distinction matters enormously for a man who, like Johnson, is entitled to have accusations proven rather than assumed. What we can say with confidence is this: two women who shared children with the same man ended up locked in an escalating conflict that neither of them, by any account, seemed able to de-escalate before it turned fatal. Whatever the full truth of who threatened whom, whatever role Carlos Smith did or didn't play in stoking that conflict, the outcome is not in dispute. A 6-year-old boy watched his mother drop him off at school on an ordinary Monday morning and never saw her alive again. That's the detail that should stay with you longer than any of the legal back and forth, longer than the charges and the bail hearings and the competing claims of who threatened whom. A little boy, dressed for school, kissed goodbye by his mother in what was, for him, an utterly unremarkable moment in an unremarkable morning. And then, in the space of a few minutes, his entire life changed in a way no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. Romeca's family has, throughout this case, tried to keep their focus fixed on exactly that. Not on the noise, not on the online arguments, not on the competing narratives that different corners of social media have tried to build around Holly Johnson's personality, her emotional state in custody, or her relationship with Carlos Smith. Their stated focus, publicly and repeatedly, has been accountability and the preservation of Romeca's memory as a real person, a daughter, a mother, a nursing student who was building something for herself and her son, rather than as a headline attached to someone else's trial. That's worth honoring here too, because if you spend any time in the online spaces that have grown up around this case, you'll find an enormous amount of commentary that has very little to do with the actual legal questions at stake, and a great deal to do with speculation, second-hand accounts, and unverified claims about Johnson's behavior or state of mind and her character, much of it originating from anonymous sources with no way to be independently confirmed. We're not going to repeat those claims here, whatever they might be, because a person awaiting trial is entitled to be discussed based on what's actually been established, not on second-hand jailhouse gossip dressed up as insight. That standard should apply to Holly Johnson exactly as much as it would apply to anyone else, and it's a standard this channel intends to hold consistently, regardless of how a case makes us feel. As of the most recent reporting, Khadijah Johnson remains charged with first-degree murder, along with additional charges added earlier this year, and she is currently out on pre-trial release under strict electronic monitoring while the case moves toward trial. No trial date resolution has been reported publicly as of this telling. The case remains active, which means the fullest, most complete account of what happened on that September morning, the actual legal truth, tested by evidence and cross-examination rather than argued over in comment sections, has not yet been delivered by a court. What has already been delivered, permanently and irreversibly, is loss. A mother who will never see her son grow up, a 6-year-old boy who will spend the rest of his life carrying a memory of the last ordinary morning he ever had with her. A family that has spent over a year watching a legal process move at the pace legal processes move, while carrying a grief that doesn't wait for court dates. If you've made it this far, we'd genuinely like to hear from you, respectfully and grounded in what's actually been established here tonight, not speculation. Do you think the legal process in this case has moved appropriately, given everything we've walked through? Let us know in the comments. If you want to follow this case as it continues to develop, because it is still active, and there will be more to report as it moves toward trial, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicle Crime, and turn on notifications so you're here when the next update comes. We follow cases like this one because families like Romeca's deserve to have her story told accurately, long after the initial headlines fade and the online noise moves on to something else. This has been Crime Scene Chronicle Crime. We'll be back with more as soon as there's more of the truth to tell.